Right now, an entire nation is sitting in the dark. Cuba has run completely out of fuel. The power grid has collapsed, hospitals can't run essential equipment, and the streets are empty. Cuba's power grid relies almost entirely on fuel imports, and those imports have vanished. Under the current U.S. economic blockade, recent sanctions on Venezuela have specifically targeted the tankers that keep Cuban lights on, effectively severing the island's energy lifeline. Desperate for relief, Havana has sent an SOS, and right now, a massive Russian oil tanker is racing across the Atlantic. It's about 10 days away from reaching the island. If the United States Navy steps in to enforce its blockade and intercepts this Russian vessel, we are looking at a severe international standoff. Which raises a question. How did a 60-year American obsession with controlling a neighboring island push it into total darkness and directly back into the arms of a global rival? To understand how we got here, we have to rewind to the 1930s. The U.S. strategy was simple: back the authoritarian leader Fulgencio Batista to maintain total control over Cuban resources. Under Batista, Cuba turned into a playground for American mobsters and businessmen. They controlled the land, the sugar mills, and the casinos, extracting massive wealth while the local population was left unemployed and impoverished. That extreme exploitation created the perfect breeding ground for rebellion. By 1959, Fidel Castro had waged a successful guerrilla war, ousting Batista and taking control of the country. Castro immediately retaliated against decades of foreign control. He nationalized every American bank, factory, and private estate overnight, forcing U.S. corporate interests off the island entirely. America's attempt to unconditionally extract wealth from its neighbor had directly produced a resilient communist state right off the coast of Florida. Humiliated, the U.S. government pivoted to forced regime change. In 1961, the CIA's Bay of Pigs invasion sent 1,500 exiles to overthrow Castro. Cuba crushed it. Following that, the CIA launched Operation Mongoose, a covert campaign to destroy Cuba's economy from within. Agents bribed workers to bomb bridges, target power plants, and burn the sugar mills that the entire island relied on. They also tried to kill Castro himself, over 650 times. The methods bordered on the absurd, ranging from exploding cigars to a poisoned scuba diving suit. He survived every single attempt. Instead of toppling the regime, these relentless attacks fortified Castro's power. He used the continuous threat of American sabotage to unite the public behind him, and realizing he needed a massive military shield, he forged an alliance with Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev. Every covert operation backfired, bringing the Soviet superpower directly to America's border. Meanwhile, the United States was already boxing Russia in, quietly deploying nuclear missiles in Turkey and Italy just 150 kilometers away. Khrushchev retaliated in kind. If the U.S. was going to point missiles at Moscow, the Soviets would place their own nuclear missiles in Cuba, mere minutes away from striking the U.S. mainland. When American spy planes discovered the base, panic set in. Kennedy ordered a strict naval blockade, surrounding the island to intercept Soviet vessels and choke off the missile supply. This aggressive posturing culminated on October 27, 1962. Below the surface of the blockade line, the U.S. Navy began dropping signaling depth charges. They didn't know they were dropping them directly onto a Russian B-59 submarine, which was completely cut off from Moscow. Believing war had already broken out, the Russian commanders prepared to fire a nuclear torpedo at the American fleet. Launching required the unanimous consent of 3 officers. 2 said yes. But the second-in-command, Vasily Arkhipov, refused to sign off. His single vote stopped the launch. The strategy of surrounding rivals with missile bases and enforcing strict naval boundaries had a devastating secondary effect. It left the world's survival in the hands of a single submarine officer. The leaders eventually struck a deal to remove the missiles from both Turkey and Cuba, averting World War III. But the United States never dropped its grudge. It implemented a permanent economic embargo against the island. Over the next 50 years, the American strategy shifted. When covert assassinations and military invasions failed, Washington relied on a slow, systematic economic strangulation to isolate the country from global trade. This chart illustrates exactly how that siege operates today. Cuba heavily relies on Venezuela for its petroleum. Recent U.S. sanctions targeted this exact pipeline, cutting off the petroleum supply and causing the fragile Cuban power grid to completely collapse. The current darkness is the physical result of this long-term strategy. By cutting off the island's last remaining energy suppliers, the policy of isolation has achieved its most literal success to date. And that brings us right back to today. A paralyzed island with empty streets, closed schools, and hospitals operating without electricity. Pushing the island to the absolute brink of societal collapse did not bring about a democratic victory. The communist government remains securely in power. Instead, the extreme economic pressure has essentially recreated the exact geopolitical conditions of 1962. Backed into a corner with zero resources, Havana has once again sent a distress signal to Moscow. It is a truly bitter historical irony. A massive Russian ship is currently cutting through the dark waters, approaching the Florida coast, strictly because American foreign policy cleared the path for it. 60 years of obsession with breaking Cuba didn't secure America's borders. It ruined a neighboring island and invited the United States' greatest rival right back to its doorstep.